In the grand halls of Imperial China, power was supposed to belong to one man, the emperor. He ruled by divine authority, commanded vast armies, and governed millions. But behind the throne, hidden from public view, another force was rising. A group of men who could never become emperors, who had no families, no heirs, and no official claim to power. And yet, they would come to control emperors themselves. They dictated policies, commanded armies, and even decided who lived and who died. These were the eunuchs of ancient China. And at certain moments in history, they became some of the most powerful individuals in the empire. How did men who were originally palace servants rise to dominate emperors and entire dynasties? And why did a system designed to limit their influence end up making them so powerful? To understand that, we must begin inside the imperial palace. Eunuchs in ancient China were men who had been castrated, usually at a young age, and were employed within the imperial palace. Their primary role was to serve in the inner court, particularly in areas that were strictly off-limits to other men, such as the emperor's household and the quarters of the imperial family. Because they could not produce heirs, eunuchs were considered safe. They posed no threat of establishing rival dynasties through bloodlines, which made them uniquely suited for positions close to the emperor and his family. Over time, eunuchs became deeply embedded in palace life. They handled daily routines, managed internal affairs, and often served as intermediaries between the emperor and the outside world. What began as a role of servitude slowly transformed into something far more significant, because proximity to power is power. In Imperial China, access to the emperor was everything. The emperor was often isolated from the outside world, surrounded by layers of bureaucracy, ritual, and security. Officials could not simply approach him freely. Communication was controlled, filtered, and highly regulated. Eunuchs, however, lived inside this inner world. They saw the emperor daily. They heard his thoughts, his fears, his frustrations. They controlled schedules, delivered messages, and sometimes even interpreted the emperor's will to others. This gave them an extraordinary advantage. While ministers debated policy in distant halls, eunuchs could influence decisions in private moments when the emperor was most vulnerable. Power did not always come from official titles. Sometimes it came from being the closest voice in the room. As eunuchs gained influence, they began to clash with another powerful group in Chinese society, the scholar officials. These officials, selected through rigorous examinations based on Confucian principles, believed in structured governance, moral leadership, and bureaucratic order. They saw themselves as the rightful administrators of the state. To them, eunuchs were uneducated, unqualified, and dangerous. But the emperor often saw things differently. Scholar officials could be independent, critical, and bound by ideology. Eunuchs, on the other hand, were personally loyal, dependent entirely on the emperor for their position and survival. This created a constant tension within the court, a struggle between formal authority and informal influence. And in many cases, the informal power of eunuchs proved stronger. In the late Han Dynasty, eunuchs formed powerful factions within the court, manipulating young emperors and eliminating political rivals. Their dominance became so severe that it contributed to instability and eventual decline. Later, during the Ming Dynasty, eunuch power reached new heights. The emperor increasingly relied on them to bypass the traditional bureaucracy, giving them authority over intelligence networks, administration, and even military operations. One of the most famous figures of this period was Zheng He, a eunuch who commanded massive naval expeditions across the Indian Ocean, projecting Chinese power far beyond its borders. Another was Wei Zhongxian, who effectively controlled the government during the reign of a weak emperor, persecuting opponents and consolidating power in his own hands. These were not mere servants. They were kingmakers. One of the most important sources of eunuch power was their control over information. In the Ming Dynasty, eunuchs oversaw secret police organizations such as the Eastern Depot, which monitored officials, gathered intelligence, and suppressed dissent. These networks allowed eunuchs to track political enemies, influence decisions, and maintain their dominance within the court. Information became a weapon. Those who controlled it could shape reality itself. Officials feared being watched, reported, and punished. This atmosphere of surveillance strengthened eunuch authority and weakened opposition. In many ways, eunuchs became the hidden architects of imperial control. Despite the risks, emperors continued to rely on eunuchs. Why? Because eunuchs offered something that others could not: personal loyalty without competing ambition. They had no families to build power bases, no heirs to establish dynasties. Their survival depended entirely on the emperor's favor. This made them useful, but also dangerous. Because while they lacked traditional power, they mastered influence operating behind the scenes, shaping decisions, and controlling access. In trying to create loyal servants, emperors had unintentionally created powerful insiders. The rise of eunuch power often came at a cost. Corruption spread, rivalries intensified, governance weakened. In multiple dynasties, excessive eunuch influence contributed to political instability and decline. Their manipulation of emperors, suppression of officials, and control of resources created deep fractures within the state. By the end of the Ming dynasty, eunuch dominance had become one of the factors that undermined effective governance, leaving the empire vulnerable to internal rebellion and external threats. What had once been a tool of control became a source of chaos. The story of Chinese eunuchs is not just about individuals. It is about a system. A system where proximity to power could outweigh official authority, where those without titles could shape empires, and where attempts to control influence often created new forms of it. Eunuchs were never meant to rule, but by standing closest to the emperor, they sometimes ruled everything. So the next time you think about power in history, ask yourself, is it always held by those on the throne, or by those standing just behind it?